Have you ever wondered why you have a last name? Or why you have to pay property taxes every year? What about getting a marriage license? It might surprise you to learn that many of the things we take for granted in our modern world were carefully planned creations. Instead, they were quick fixes, temporary solutions, or just plain weird ideas from the Middle Ages that somehow stuck around. Let's dive into some medieval ideas that were never meant to last, but never went away. First up, last names. Today, they feel like a core part of our identity. But back in the early Middle Ages, most people in Europe just had one name, like John or Mary. As populations grew, this got confusing. Which John are you talking about? To solve this, people started adding descriptive tags. John the baker became John Baker. Mary, who lived by the hill, became Mary Hill. Some names came from your father, like Johnson, son of John. These were just practical nicknames, temporary labels. But over time, what started as a handy descriptor became a hereditary surname, passed down through generations. The temporary fix became a permanent part of who we are. Now, let's talk about something everyone loves: taxes. Specifically, property taxes. One of the most famous examples comes from 11th century England. After William the Conqueror invaded, he wanted to know exactly what he had conquered and how much it was worth so he could tax it. So he commissioned a massive survey of all the land and property in England. This survey was so thorough and final that people compared it to the Last Judgment, calling it the Doomsday Book. It was meant to be a one-time snapshot of the kingdom's wealth. But the idea of taxing people based on the property they owned was just too good for rulers to give up. The concept stuck, evolved, and now, centuries later, we're all still paying property taxes based on the value of our homes. What about your job? The idea of a formal employment contract also has medieval roots. In a world of farmers and artisans, most work was based on informal agreements or apprenticeships. But as guilds and towns grew, so did the need for more defined labor relationships. For example, when building a massive cathedral, you couldn't just rely on a handshake. You needed skilled masons, carpenters, and glaziers for a long-term project. Contracts were drawn up specifying wages, hours, and the duration of work. These early employment agreements were often for a specific project, a temporary arrangement, but they laid the groundwork for the modern job contract, which defines our entire professional lives. Here's one we all became very familiar with recently: quarantine. The word itself comes from the Italian 40 giorni, meaning 40 days. During the Black Death in the 14th century, the bustling port city of Venice was terrified of ships bringing the plague. As a protective measure, they ordered incoming ships to anchor away from the city for 40 days before anyone could come ashore. Why 40 days? It was a number with biblical significance, not scientific backing. They had no idea how diseases spread, but they noticed this waiting period seemed to work. This emergency public health measure, born out of fear and desperation, became the blueprint for how we handle contagious diseases today. A temporary medieval solution became a cornerstone of modern epidemiology. Think universities are a modern invention? Think again. The first universities in Europe, like Bologna, Paris, and Oxford, emerged in the 11th and 12th centuries. But they weren't grand institutions with beautiful campuses. They were basically guilds of students and teachers. Students would pool their money to hire a master to teach them subjects like law, medicine, or theology. It was a very practical, almost commercial arrangement. There were no formal degrees at first, just a community of scholars gathering to learn. These informal scholarly guilds were never planned to become the sprawling, degree-granting, multi-billion-dollar institutions they are today. They just sort of happened and then kept growing. Ever had a curfew? The word comes from the Old French couvre-feu, which means cover fire. In medieval towns, houses were made of wood and tightly packed. A stray ember from a fireplace could burn the whole town down. So, a bell would ring at a set time each evening, signaling that everyone had to cover their hearth fires for safety. It was a practical fire prevention law. Over time, the meaning shifted. Rulers realized that telling people they had to be home by a certain time was a great way to control the population and prevent crime. The original fire safety rule morphed into the social control mechanism we know today. Finally, marriage registration. For much of the Middle Ages, getting married was simple. If two people consented to be married, they were. This was often done in front of witnesses, maybe at the church door, but there was no official state record. This led to a lot of confusion and disputes. Was that person really married? Could they inherit property? To clear things up, the church and later the state began requiring that all marriages be officially recorded. What started as a way to solve legal headaches and property disputes became the system of marriage licenses and certificates we have today, a bureaucratic stamp on a personal commitment. So many parts of our lives, from our names to our jobs to our health protocols, are ghosts of the Middle Ages. They were practical solutions to immediate problems, never intended to last for centuries. But they were just effective enough, just sticky enough, that they became embedded in the fabric of our society. It just goes to show that sometimes the most enduring ideas aren't the grand plans, but the clever little fixes that refuse to go away. Have you ever wondered why we do things the way we do? Like, why do we have passports, or jury trials, or even the calendar on our wall? It feels like these systems have been around forever, a permanent part of our lives. But what if I told you that many of the fundamental structures of our modern world were never meant to be permanent at all? They were actually temporary, quick-fix solutions from the medieval era that just stuck around. Today, we read diving deep into the fascinating stories of medieval hacks that accidentally became the pillars of our society. Get ready, because what you're about to hear will change the way you see everything. Let's start with something we all have, or at least want, a passport. Think about it. It's a little booklet that proves who you are and allows you to travel. Seems pretty official, right? Well, the concept has its roots in medieval England, specifically during the reign of King Henry V in the 15th century. Back then, England was in the midst of the 100 Years' War with France. The king needed a way to identify his own subjects, especially when they were traveling abroad, to make sure they weren't spies and to grant them safe passage through friendly territories. So he introduced a document called a safe conduct. This was basically a letter from the monarch, asking other rulers to let the bearer pass safely. It was a temporary measure, a wartime necessity. The idea was simple. Once the war was over, people could go back to traveling freely like they used to. But something funny happened. Other kingdoms saw how useful these documents were. They started issuing their own. The system was just too convenient to give up. It helped control borders, track citizens, and project authority. So, this temporary wartime fix slowly evolved over centuries. It wasn't until the early 20th century, after World War I, that the passport system was standardized into the little books we know today. What began as a king's wartime letter became a global requirement for travel. A temporary fix became a permanent fixture. Next up, let's talk about our legal system, specifically the jury trial. The idea of being judged by a group of your peers feels like a cornerstone of justice and liberty. But its origin story is much stranger, and frankly, a bit more brutal. Before juries, how did they determine if someone was guilty or innocent in medieval Europe? They used something called trial by ordeal. This meant the accused had to undergo a dangerous test, like being thrown into water. If they floated, they were guilty because the pure water was rejecting them. If they sank, they were innocent, but probably drowned. Another popular one was trial by combat, where you'd fight your accuser to the death. The winner was deemed to be in the right. This all changed in the year 1215. The Catholic Church, at the Fourth Lateran Council, decided that these ordeals were superstitious nonsense and banned priests from participating. This created a huge problem for kings and local lords. Suddenly, their entire justice system was gone. They had no way to decide legal cases, so they had to scramble for a solution. In England, King John's government looked at an existing but rarely used practice. Sometimes, a king would gather a group of local men who knew the defendant and ask them to swear an oath, or jure in French, about what they knew. It was basically a way of gathering local information. With trial by ordeal gone, they thought, hey, why don't we just use this group of oath takers to decide the whole case? It was a stopgap measure, an emergency patch for a broken system. They weren't trying to invent a new philosophy of justice. They just needed something, anything, to keep the courts running. But it worked. The idea of having local citizens weigh the evidence was surprisingly effective. It slowly became the standard, evolving over centuries into the jury system we recognize today, with impartial members who don't know the defendant. A temporary legal patch became a fundamental human right in many countries. Now, let's shift gears from law to the open road. Or rather, the not-so-open road. I'm talking about toll roads. Nobody likes paying them, right? It feels like you're paying to use a road that should be free. Well, you can thank the medieval period for that, too. In the Middle Ages, long-distance travel was tough. Roads were terrible, muddy, dangerous, and poorly maintained. Local lords and nobles were responsible for the roads that passed through their lands, but they didn't have the tax revenue to properly maintain them. So, many of them came up with a clever idea. They would grant a charter to a group of merchants or a local town, giving them the right to fix a specific stretch of road or build a new bridge. In return for this investment, the charter allowed them to set up a barrier, a pike, or a turnstile, and charge a fee, or a toll, to everyone who used it. This was seen as a temporary arrangement. The idea was that once the investors had recouped the cost of their construction and made a reasonable profit, the road would become free for public use again. The tolls were just to cover the initial investment. But here's the twist. The owners of these toll roads quickly realized they had a cash cow. Why would they ever give it up? They found ways to extend their charters, argue that maintenance costs were ongoing, and keep the tolls in place indefinitely. The concept was so profitable that it spread everywhere. Centuries later, modern governments adopted the same model to fund major highway and bridge projects. So the next time you toss a coin into a toll basket, remember, you're participating in a medieval business model that was never supposed to last. Finally, let's look at something we use every single day, the calendar. The Gregorian calendar, the one on your phone and on your wall, seems so logical and scientific, but it's the result of a massive panicked correction to a flawed medieval system. For centuries, Europe used the Julian calendar, established by Julius Caesar. The Julian calendar was pretty good, but it had a tiny error. It calculated the year as being 365.25 days long. The actual solar year is about 11 minutes shorter than that. 11 minutes doesn't sound like much, but over centuries, those minutes add up. By the 16th century, the calendar was out of sync with the seasons by about 10 days. This was a huge problem for the Catholic Church. The date of Easter is calculated based on the spring equinox. With the calendar drifting, Easter was being celebrated later and later in the season. It was a theological crisis. So, in 1582, Pope Gregory XIII decided something had to be done. He commissioned a new calendar, the Gregorian calendar, which corrected the leap year rule to be more accurate. But how do you fix a 10-day error? You just delete them. The Pope decreed that the day after October 4th, 1582, would not be October 5th, it would be October 15th. 10 days just vanished from history. This was meant to be a one-time, drastic fix to get the calendar back on track and solve the Easter problem. It wasn't intended to create a whole new global standard. In fact, Many non-Catholic countries resisted the change for centuries. Great Britain and its American colonies didn't adopt it until 1752. But eventually, for the sake of international trade and communication, the Pope's emergency calendar correction was adopted almost everywhere. What started as a desperate attempt to fix the date of a religious holiday became the way the entire world measures time. So, from the passport in your pocket to the justice system in our courts, from the tolls on the highway to the very date on the calendar, our world is built on a foundation of medieval quick fixes. These weren't grand designs for the future. They were pragmatic, sometimes clumsy, solutions to immediate problems. But they worked well enough that nobody ever got around to replacing them. They became permanent by accident. It just goes to show that sometimes the most enduring legacies are the ones we never intended to leave. Thanks for watching. If you found this as fascinating as I did, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden history of our world. See you next time.